Get out of my barn, or I'll put a bullet through you. Clara Whitmore's voice trembled with rage, her rifle steady in her calloused hands, aimed at the shadowed figure slumped against her hay bales. The storm outside roared, shaking the walls of her isolated ranch in the Dakota Territory. But it was the stranger's piercing eyes, dark, defiant, and unmistakably Lakota, that froze her blood. It was a night in the late summer of 1876, and the winds howled across the endless plains, carrying the scent of rain and trouble. Clara, a widow of 38, had lived alone on her frontier ranch since her husband, Jacob, was killed 3 years prior in a skirmish with the Lakota. The memory of that day is blood-soaking the earth. The screams of battle haunted her every waking moment. She had built a life of solitude here, her only companions the creak of her porch swing and the ghosts of her past. But tonight, something had invaded her sanctuary. The stranger, a young man no older than 25, lay sprawled in the straw, his chest heaving, blood seeping from a gash on his side. His buckskin shirt was torn, and his face, streaked with dirt and sweat, bore the marks of a man who had run for his life. Clara's lantern cast flickering shadows across his sharp features, revealing a warrior's braid and a necklace of beads that confirmed her worst fears. He was Lakota, one of the people she blamed for her husband's death. Yet, as she stood over him, her finger twitching on the trigger, his eyes met hers not with fear, but with a quiet resolve that unnerved her. "Shoot if you must," he rasped, his voice low but steady, thick with the accent of his people. "But I mean you no harm, woman. I am Tkasik, and I am hunted." Clara's heart pounded. Trasikekrizi horse in her tongue, a name whispered in fear and awe across the frontier. She had heard of him, a young warrior of the Lakota, said to be fierce and unyielding, a shadow in the night who struck against the encroaching settlers and their army. The Fort Riley Scouts, a ruthless detachment of the U.S. Army, had been scouring the plains for weeks, their boots trampling the land in search of men like him. And now, here he was, bleeding in her barn, daring her to decide his fate. Her mind raced. Every instinct screamed to pull the trigger, to end the threat of a man who might have been there when Jacob fell. But something stayed her hand, a flicker of doubt, or perhaps the weight of her own loneliness. She had not spoken to another soul in weeks, and the storm outside was a beast, tearing at the world with unrelenting fury. If she killed him, she would be alone again, with only the wind and her memories for company. If she spared him, she risked everything: her safety, her reputation, her fragile hold on this land. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her voice sharp as the crack of thunder outside. "Why my barn? Speak, or I swear I'll end you." Tasik's breath hitched, pain etching lines across his face. "I was ambushed," he said. "The soldiers, they came for my people. I fought, but they were too many. I ran, and your light was the only one I saw." He gestured weakly toward the faint glow of her lantern, now swaying in the drafty barn. "I ask only for shelter, not for me, but for my village. They will die if I do not return." Clara's grip on the rifle tightened. His village, the Lakota, the people she had sworn to hate, whose arrows she imagined piercing Jacob's heart. Yet his words stirred something in her, a memory of Jacob's own stories, of how he had once traded with the Lakota, how he had spoken of their honor before the wars turned them all to enemies. She lowered the rifle an inch, her eyes narrowing. "You expect me to believe you? A Lakota warrior, begging for help from a white woman? What game are you playing?" "No game," he said, his voice growing weaker. "The soldiers lie. They say we burned a settlement, killed women and children. We did not. They want our land, our lives. If you turn me away, I die, and my people with me." Clara's chest tightened. The accusation rang with a truth she could not ignore. She had heard whispers in town tales of the Fort Riley Scouts, fabricating reasons to attack the Lakota, to drive them from the plains and claim their land for new settlers. Her neighbors, fearful and quick to judge, believed every word the army fed them. But Clara, who had lost everything to this endless war, knew better than to trust blindly. Still, helping this man would mark her as a traitor in the eyes of her own people. The settlers in nearby Willow Creek already whispered about her, the widow who refused to remarry, who clung to her land like a ghost. What would they say if they found a Lakota in her barn? The storm roared louder, a gust rattling the barn door. Clara glanced outside, where lightning illuminated the barren landscape, her fields, her home, her prison. She had no one left to lose, no one to answer to but herself. And yet, the weight of her decision pressed down like the storm itself. If she helped him, she would be stepping into a war she had spent years avoiding. If she turned him away, she would be condemning a man to death and perhaps his entire village. "Stay still," she snapped, lowering the rifle but keeping it ready. "If you move, you're dead." She stepped closer, her boots crunching on the straw, and examined his wound. The gash was deep, likely from a saber, and he was losing blood fast. She had no love for him, but she could not let a man die in her barn. Not when she had the means to save him. Years of tending to Jacob's injuries had made her skilled with a needle and bandage. Though she cursed herself for what she was about to do, she fetched a bucket of water, a cloth, and a bottle of whiskey from the house, her mind a storm of its own. As she cleaned his wound, Tkasik watched her in silence, his eyes never leaving her face. "Why?" he asked finally, as she threaded a needle to stitch him up. "Why help me?" Clara didn't answer right away. Her hands worked quickly, the needle piercing his skin as he gritted his teeth against the pain. "I don't know," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe I'm tired of death." The night passed in tense silence, broken only by the storm's fury and Tassik's labored breathing. Clara worked by lantern light, stitching and bandaging, her mind wrestling with the choice she had made. She could still turn him out, let the storm or the soldiers claim him. But as she tied off the last bandage, she knew she had crossed a line. This man, this enemy, was now her responsibility. By dawn, the storm had calmed, leaving a world of mud and ruin outside. Clara stood at the barn door, staring at the horizon where the plains stretched endlessly, dotted with sagebrush and the ghosts of battles past. Tkasik slept fitfully behind her, his fever breaking, but his strength far from returned. She knew the scouts would come soon, they always did, sniffing out their prey like wolves, and when they found him here, they would not hesitate to burn her world to the ground. Clara's life had been defined by loss, her parents to fever when she was a girl, her husband to war, her dreams to the relentless grind of the frontier. She had survived by keeping her heart closed, her rifle loaded, and her trust in no one. But now, as she looked at the wounded warrior in her barn, she felt something shift. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but a spark of purpose she had thought long dead. If Tkasik spoke the truth, if his village was innocent, then she could not stand by and let them be slaughtered. But to help him meant defying everything she had known, her neighbors, her past, her own hatred. She returned to the house, her boots heavy with mud, and retrieved Jacob's journal from a locked chest under her bed. It was a worn leather book, filled with his neat handwriting, a record of their life together and the truths he had uncovered before his death. He had written of the Lakota, of their pride and their struggles, and of the army's leash-out they had staged attacks to justify their campaigns. Clara had never had the courage to read it fully, not since his death, but now she opened it, her fingers trembling. If there was proof of the army's deceit, it would be here, in his words. As she read, the weight of her husband's truth settled over her. He had died not because of the Lakota, but because of men like Captain Elias Holt, the leader of the Fort Riley Scouts, whose name appeared in Jacob's notes as a man who thrived on bloodshed. Holt had been there the day Jacob died, leading a charge that turned a peaceful meeting into a massacre. Clara's breath caught in her throat. The man she had blamed for her husband's death was not Tkasik or his people, but the very army she had once trusted. The sound of hoof beats snapped her from her thoughts. She rushed to the window, her heart racing as she saw 3 riders approaching through the morning mist. Their blue uniforms marked them as scouts, their rifles glinting in the pale light. Clara grabbed her own rifle and hurried to the barn, where Tkasik was stirring, his eyes alert despite his weakness. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice urgent. "Can you move?" He nodded, grimacing as he pushed himself up. "I can try, but if they find me, they'll kill us both." Clara's mind raced. The barn was no place to hide. They would search it first. The house was too small, too exposed. Her eyes fell on the root cellar, hidden beneath a trapdoor in the barn's floor. It was cramped and damp, but it might buy them time. "Down there," she said, pointing. "Now." Tkasik hesitated, his pride warring with his survival. You risk too much, he said. Why? Because I'm not letting them win, Clara snapped, her voice fierce. Not this time. She helped him into the cellar, covering the trapdoor with straw and boards. As the riders drew closer, she stepped outside, her rifle slung over her shoulder, her face a mask of calm. The leader, a tall man with a scarred face and cold eyes, dismounted and approached. She recognized him from Town Captain Elias Holt, the man whose name stained her husband's journal. Mrs. Whitmore, Holt said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. We're tracking a savage, a Lakota dog who killed good men. Seen anything strange out here? Clara's heart pounded, but she met his gaze without flinching. Nothing but the storm, she said, and I don't take kindly to soldiers on my land. Holt's smile was thin, dangerous. Careful, widow. Harboring an enemy is treason. We'll search your place, with or without your blessing. Clara's fingers itched for her rifle, but she knew drawing it would mean death. Instead, she stepped aside, her mind racing for a way to protect Tkasik and herself. As the scouts tore through her barn, overturning hay and kicking at walls, she clutched Jacob's journal behind her back, its weight a reminder of the truth she now carried. If she could keep Tkasik hidden, if she could get him to his village, she might uncover the proof to stop Holt's campaign. But the cost would be higher: home, her safety, perhaps her life. The search stretched on, the scouts growing frustrated as they found nothing. Clara stood by, her heart in her throat, praying the cellar would hold. But as Holt turned to leave, his eyes lingered on her, sharp and suspicious. We'll be back, Mrs. Whitmore, he said. And if you're hiding anything, I'll burn this place to ash. As the riders disappeared into the plains, Clara sank to her knees, the journal clutched to her chest. She had bought them time, but the war was far from over. Tkassik's life, his village's survival, and her own redemption now rested on her next move. She had chosen to save a man she once hated, and in doing so, she had set herself against the might of the U.S. Army. The path ahead was treacherous, but for the first time in years, Clara felt alive. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Clara tended to Tkassik's wounds, bringing him water and bread from her meager stores. He spoke little, but his gratitude was clear in his eyes. As night fell, they sat in the barn, the air thick with tension. Clara opened Jacob's journal again, reading aloud passages that detailed the Army's treachery, how Holt had ordered the massacre of a Lakota hunting party, then blamed them for attacking settlers. Tkasik listened in silence, his face a mask of pain and resolve. My people are not what your kind think, he said at last. We fight to live, to keep our children safe. The soldiers want our blood, our land. They will not stop until we are gone. Clara nodded, her throat tight. I know, and I'm starting to see who the real enemy is. Their conversation was cut short by the distant sound of hoofbeats, more riders, closer this time. Clara's heart sank. Holt had not believed her, and now he was back, likely with more men. She helped Tkasik to his feet, his strength returning, but still fragile. We can't stay here, she said. If they find you, we're both dead. Where can we go? He asked, his voice steady despite his pain. My village is 2 days' ride, and I am no use like this. Clara thought of Willow Creek, the nearby settler town. There were people there who might listen: Mary, the kind-hearted widow who cared for her nephew Tommy, or old man Jenkins, who had always been skeptical of the Army. But going to town meant risking exposure, and the settlers were as likely to turn on her as to help. Still, she had Jacob's journal, and with it, a chance to expose Holt's lies. We go to my people first, Clara said, her voice firm. I'll find someone to help us get you to your village. But we move tonight, before Holt comes back. Tkasik nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a trust that both startled and steadied her. As they prepared to leave, Clara packed a small bag with supplies food, bandages, and the journal. The night was clear, the stars sharp against the black sky, but danger hung heavy in the air. They slipped out of the barn, moving silently across the plains, to unlikely allies bound by a shared enemy and a fragile hope. The journey to Willow Creek was fraught with peril. Every rustle in the grass, every shadow in the moonlight, set Clara's nerves on edge. Tkasik, weakened but determined, kept pace as best he could, his hand pressed to his bandaged side. They traveled through gullies and dry riverbeds, avoiding the open trails where the scouts patrolled. By dawn, they reached the outskirts of Willow Creek, a cluster of wooden buildings nestled against a low hill. Clara hid Tkachuk in an abandoned shed, promising to return with help. In town, she found Mary at the general store, her face lined with worry as she tended to Tommy, a boy of 10 with bright eyes and a quick smile. Clara hesitated, unsure how to explain her mission. "Mary," she began, her voice low, "I need your help. There's a Mana Lakotawa's hurt. The army's after him, but he's not what they say. I have proof." Mary's eyes widened, fear mingling with curiosity. "Clara, you're talking madness. If the town finds out you're hiding an Indian, they'll string you up." "I know," Clara said, pulling the journal from her bag. "But read this." Jacob wrote it. "The army's lying, Mary. They're killing innocent people, and I can't let it happen." Mary took the journal, her hands trembling as she skimmed the pages. Tommy, overhearing, tugged at her sleeve. "Is it true, Aunt Mary? Are the soldiers bad?" "Quiet, Tommy," Mary said, but her eyes softened as she looked at Clara. "I'll help you, but we can't stay here. The town's already buzzing about the scouts. They say a Lakota killed a family out by Red Canyon. People are scared." "It's a lie," Clara said, her voice fierce, "and I'm going to prove it." As Clara left the store, a shout rang out. She turned to see a group of settlers gathered around a rider halt, his face grim as he addressed the crowd. "We've got a traitor among us," he bellowed. "Clara Whitmore is hiding a savage. Bring her to me, and we'll end this threat." The crowd turned, their eyes locking on Clara. Fear gripped her, but she stood tall, Jacob's journal clutched to her chest. She had started this fight, and she would see it through no matter the cost. Clara Whitmore stood frozen in the dusty street of Willow Creek, the weight of a dozen accusing stares pinning her in place. Captain Elias Holt's voice still echoed, branding her a traitor before the townsfolk she had known for years. Her hand tightened around Jacob's journal, its leather cover worn smooth by her grip, as if it could shield her from the rising tide of anger. The morning sun beat down on the wooden storefronts, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward her like grasping hands. She had come to town seeking allies, but now she was a pariah, and Tkachuk, hidden in the shed on the outskirts, depended on her to survive. Clara Whitmore stepped forward. Holt barked, his scarred face twisted with a predator's glee. He sat tall on his horse, flanked by 2 scouts, their rifles resting casually but menacingly across their saddles. The crowd, shopkeepers, farmers, women clutching their children, murmured, their fear and distrust palpable. Clara's heart pounded, but she forced her voice steady. "I've done nothing wrong," she said, lifting her chin. "You're the one spreading lies, Holt, calling an innocent man a savage to justify your bloodlust." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Old man Jenkins, leaning on his cane by the saloon, squinted at her while Mary, standing in the doorway of the general store with Tommy clinging to her skirts, looked torn between fear and resolve. Holt's smile was cold, his eyes glinting with the certainty of a man who held power over life and death. "Innocent," he sneered. "You're hiding a Lakota killer, woman. A dog who slaughtered a family at Red Canyon. Hand him over, or I'll tear this town apart to find him." Clara's blood ran cold. The Red Canyon massacre was the lie. Tkachuk had warned her of Buddha fabrication to rally settlers against his people. Jacob's journal, tucked against her chest, held the truth. Holt's scouts had staged attacks before, pinning them on the Lakota to justify their raids. But proving it here, now, with an angry mob and armed soldiers, was another matter. She needed time, and she needed Tkachuk safe. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "Search my ranch if you must, but you'll find nothing." Holt dismounted, his boots thudding on the packed earth. He stepped closer, his presence looming like a storm cloud. "You're a fool, Whitmore, and fools don't last long out here." He turned to the crowd, raising his voice. "Anyone who helps this woman is an enemy of the United States. Think on that before you choose sides." The townsfolk shifted uneasily, their loyalty torn between fear of Holt and their lingering trust in Clara. She had lived among them, shared their hardships, mourned their losses. But the specter of a Lakota warrior, a man they had been taught to fear, clouded their judgment. Clara's eyes found Mary's, silently pleading for support. Mary hesitated, then stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. "Clara's no traitor," she said. "She's one of us. If she says there's no killer, I believe her." A murmur of agreement came from a Jenkins, the blacksmith, and a young farmer named Caleb. But others shouted in protest, their voices sharp with panic. Holt's gaze snapped to Mary, his lip curling. "You'll regret that, widow," he said, then turned to his men. "Search the town. Every shed, every cellar. Find that savage. Savage, and you'll answer for it." The crowd dispersed as Holt's men fanned out, their heavy steps kicking up dust as they moved toward the outskirts of Willow Creek. Clara's heart raced. She had to get to Tkasik before they did. She slipped away from the crowd, her mind a whirlwind of fear and determination. Mary followed, pulling Tommy along, her face pale but resolute. "Clara, what have you done?" Mary whispered as they hurried down a side alley toward the shed where Tkasik was hidden. "If they find him, they'll kill Hyman you." "I know," Clara said, her voice tight, "but I can't let them slaughter his people for a lie. Jacob's journal proves it, Mary. The army's been playing us all for fools." Tommy, wide-eyed, tugged at Mary's hand. "Is the Indian man bad, Aunt Clara? Why's everyone so mad?" Clara knelt, meeting his gaze. "He's not bad, Tommy. He's just trying to protect his family, like we protect ours. But some folks don't see it that way." Mary nodded, her expression softening. "We'll help you get him out, but we need a plan, and fast." They reached the shed, a dilapidated structure hidden behind a cluster of cottonwoods. Clara eased open the door, her rifle ready, and found Tkasik sitting against the wall, his breathing shallow but steady. His dark eyes met hers, a mix of gratitude and weariness in their depths. "You came back," he said, his voice hoarse. "Told you I would," Clara replied, checking his bandages. The stitches held, but he was still weak, his skin clammy with fever. "We've got trouble. Holt's men are searching the town. We need to move, you know." Tkasik nodded, struggling to his feet with Clara's help. "My village is 2 days west, in the Black Hills. If I can get there, I can warn them." Clara's mind raced. 2 days' travel with a wounded man, through open country crawling with scouts, was near impossible. But Jacob's journal, still tucked in her bag, was their only hope, a record of Holt's lies that could sway the Lakota, and perhaps even some settlers. She turned to Mary. "Can you get us a wagon? Something to cover him in?" Mary hesitated, then nodded. "Caleb's got one at his farm. I'll fetch it. Stay here and keep low." As Mary and Tommy hurried off, Clara helped Tkasik sit, giving him water from her canteen. The shed was stifling, the air thick with the scent of moldy wood and fear. She opened the journal, reading aloud to pass the time and keep her nerves steady. Jacob's words detailed Holt's treachery, how he had ordered the massacre of a Lakota hunting party, then blamed them for a settler attack to justify further raids. Tkasik listened, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with a quiet rage. "Your husband saw the truth," he said. "He was a good man." Clara's throat tightened. "He was, and he'd want me to do this." The weight was agonizing, every creak of the shed's walls making Clara's hand twitch toward her rifle. She thought of Willow Creek, of the neighbors who now saw her as a traitor. She had always been an Outsidero widow who refused to remarry, who clung to her ranch like a lifeline. Now, she was risking it all for a man she barely knew, driven by a truth she could not ignore. Mary returned with Caleb, a lanky farmer with a weathered face and a nervous glance. He had hitched a wagon to his mule, loaded with hay to conceal Tkasik. "This is madness, Clara," he muttered, helping her lift Tkasik into the wagon. "But Mary showed me that journal. If it's true, Holt's the devil himself." "It's true," Clara said, covering Tkasik with a tarp, "and we're going to prove it." They set out under the cover of dusk, the wagon creaking along a back trail that wound through gullies and sagebrush. Clara drove, her rifle across her lap, while Mary and Tommy sat beside her, their faces tense. Tkasik lay hidden in the back, his breathing ragged but steady. The plains stretched endlessly round them, the horizon glowing faintly with the last light of day. Every shadow seemed a threat, every sound a warning of pursuit. The first night passed in uneasy silence, the group camping in a dry riverbed to avoid detection. Clara tended Tassik's wound, cleaning it with whiskey and rewrapping the bandages. He spoke of his village women and children, elders who told stories of the old ways, warriors who fought not for glory but for survival. "We are not your enemies," he said. "We only want to live." Clara nodded, her heart heavy. She thought of Jacob, of the man he had been before the war turned neighbor against neighbor. He had believed in fairness, in truth. She would honor that now, no matter the cost. By dawn, they were moving again, the trail growing rougher as they neared the Black Hills. Clara's eyes scanned the horizon, her nerves frayed from lack of sleep and the constant fear of pursuit. Mary, too, was on edge, her hands twisting in her lap. Tommy, however, seemed undaunted, his curiosity outweighing his fear. "Will we meet more Indians?" he asked, his voice bright. "If we're lucky," Clara said, managing a smile. "And if we're smart, we'll keep them safe." The second day brought trouble. As they crossed a narrow pass, hoofbeats thundered behind them. Clara's heart sank. Scouts, 5 of them, riding hard with Holt at the lead. She whipped the mule, urging it faster, but the wagon was slow, the terrain unforgiving. "Get down," she shouted to Mary and Tommy, pushing them beneath the seat. Tkasik stirred in the back, his voice weak but urgent. "Leave me. Save yourselves." "Not a chance," Clara snapped, grabbing her rifle. She pulled the wagon behind a cluster of boulders, hoping to buy time. The scouts were closing in, their shouts carrying on the wind. Clara's mind was said she could fight, but 5 against 1 was suicide. She needed a plan, and she needed it now. "Caleb, take Mary and Tommy," she said, her voice low. "Head for the hills. I'll hold them off." Caleb protested, but Mary grabbed his arm. "She's right. We'll find help. Go, Clara." Clara nodded, her heart pounding as she helped Tkasik from the wagon. They crouched behind the boulders, her rifle ready, his hand clutching a knife he had hidden in his belt. The scouts dismounted, fanning out to search the rocks. Holt's voice rang out, cold and mocking. "Come out, Whitmore. You can't hide forever." Clara's blood boiled. She thought of Jacob, of the lies that had taken him, of the village that would burn if she failed. She aimed her rifle, her hands steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Ascending the steep incline, she fired, the shot echoing through the pass. A scout fell, clutching his shoulder, as the others scrambled for cover. The air was thick with dust and gunpowder, the chaos a blur of shouts and movement. Tkasik, despite his wounds, lunged from their hiding spot, his knife flashing as he tackled another scout. Clara fired again, her aim true, dropping a second man. The remaining scouts hesitated, caught off guard by her resistance. She used the moment to drag Tkasik back to the wagon, which Caleb had turned around. They piled in, whipping the mule into a frantic gallop as bullets whizzed past. The chase was relentless, the scouts pursuing through the night. Clara's heart thundered as she navigated the rocky terrain. Tassik's labored breathing a constant reminder of what was at stake. They reached a narrow canyon by midnight, the walls closing in like a trap. Clara knew they couldn't outrun the scouts forever. She needed to reach the Lakota village, to deliver the journal and warn them of Holt's plan. As dawn broke, they spotted a faint plume of smoke in the distanceth Lakota village. Clara's hope surged, but so did her fear. The scouts were close, their horses gaining ground. She made a choice, one born of desperation and duty. She handed the journal to Tkasik, her voice urgent. "Take this. Get to your people. I'll hold them here." Tassik's eyes widened. "You'll die." "Maybe," Clara said, her voice steady, "but your village won't. Go." She helped him down, pointing him toward a hidden trail through the canyon. As he disappeared into the shadows, Clara turned to face the scouts, her rifle raised. She was one woman against 3 men, but she was Clara Whitmore, widow of Jacob, and she would not let Holt's lies prevail. The standoff was brutal, a dance of bullets and blood. Clara fired, her shots precise, wounding another scout before they closed in. She fought with everything she had, her heart burning with the memory of Jacob's truth. But numbers were against her. A bullet grazed her arm, pain searing through her, and as she fell behind a rock, Holt's voice rang out, promising death if she didn't surrender. Clara's resolve hardened. She would not let them win out Holt, not the lies. She fired again, her aim faltering as blood soaked her sleeve. The world blurred, but she held fast, knowing Cossack was close to his village. The journal in his hands. She had given him a chance, and that was enough. Clara Whitmore crouched behind the jagged boulder, her breath ragged, blood seeping from the graze on her arm. The narrow canyon in the Black Hills echoed with the sharp crack of gunfire, the air thick with dust and the acrid scent of gunpowder. Captain Elias Holt and his remaining scouts were closing in, their boots crunching on the rocky ground, their voices taunting her through the dawn haze. She clutched her rifle, her hands slick with sweat and blood, knowing she was outnumbered and outgunned. But Cossack was on his way to his village, Jacob's journal in his possession, carrying the truth that could save his people. Clara had bought him time, and she would hold this ground as long as her strength allowed. "Come out, Whitmore." Holt's voice cut through the morning air, sharp and venomous. "You're only delaying the inevitable. That savage won't get far, and neither will you." Clara's jaw tightened. She thought of Jacob, his kind eyes and steady hands, the man who had believed in fairness even when the world turned cruel. His journal, now in Tassik's hands, was her last act of defiance against the lies that had taken him. She had no illusions about her Odstwo scouts remained, plus Holt, and her ammunition was low. But she was Clara Whitmore, a woman forged by loss and hardened by the frontier, and she would not surrender. She peered over the boulder, her eyes scanning the canyon. The scouts were advancing cautiously, their rifles glinting in the early light. Holt stood back, his scarred face twisted with rage, directing his men like a general in a war of his own making. Clara took a deep breath, steadying her trembling hands, and fired. The shot struck a scout in the leg, sending him sprawling with a cry. The other returned fire, forcing her to duck as bullets chipped the rock above her head. Her arm throbbed, the wound burning with every movement, but she gritted her teeth and reloaded. She had to keep them at bay, give Cossack enough time to reach his village and warn Chief Black Elk. The Lakota were not far. Nosh had seen the smoke of their camp rising against the horizon. If she could hold out, if she could survive, there was a chance for justice. The standoff stretched on, minutes feeling like hours. Clara's shots were deliberate, conserving her dwindling bullets, but the scouts were relentless, inching closer with each exchange. Holt's voice grew louder, more desperate. "You're throwing your life away for a savage," he shouted. "You think you can stop us? This land belongs to us now." Clara's heart burned with fury. This land, her land, the Lakota's land, had been soaked in blood because of men like Holt, men who twisted truth for power. She thought of Tassik's words, his quiet insistence that his people only wanted to live. She thought of Mary and Tommy, of the settlers who might yet see the truth if she could get the journal to the right hands. She fired again, her aim faltering as pain clouded her vision, but her resolve held firm. Suddenly, a new sound broke through the gunfire thunder of hooves, coming from the direction of the village. Clara's heart leapt. Had Cossack made it? She dared a glance, squinting through the dust, and saw a group of Lakota warriors riding hard toward the canyon, their faces painted for battle, their bows and rifles raised. At their head was Cossack, his wounds slowing him but his eyes blazing with determination. Behind him rode Chief Black Elk, an older man with a presence that commanded respect, his expression fierce yet measured. The scouts hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden arrival. Holt cursed, barking orders to his men, but Clara seized the moment. She stood, ignoring the pain in her arm, and fired her last bullet, grazing the remaining scout's shoulder. He stumbled, and the Lakota closed in, their war cries echoing off the canyon walls. What followed was chaos, a blur of arrows, bullets, and clashing bodies. Clara dropped her empty rifle and drew her knife, her vision swimming as she fought to stay upright. Cossack reached her, his knife gleaming as he cut down a scout who lunged at her. "You're alive," he said, his voice rough with relief. "Barely," Clara gasped, clutching her arm. "Did you give them the journal?" He nodded. "Black Elk has it. He knows the truth." Before Clara could respond, Holt charged, his saber drawn, his face a mask of rage. He aimed for Cossack, but Clara threw herself between them, her knife flashing. The blade caught Holt's arm, drawing blood, but he was stronger, faster. He knocked her to the ground, his saber raised for a killing blow. Tkasik tackled him, the two men grappling in the dirt, their struggle a microcosm of the war tearing the frontier apart. Clara scrambled to her feet, her head spinning, and grabbed a fallen rifle. She aimed at Holt, her hands shaking, but the Lakota warriors had surrounded them, their bows trained on the captain. Black Elk raised a hand, his voice booming over the chaos. Enough. The fighting stopped, the air heavy with tension. Holt, pinned by Tkasik, glared up at the chief, his chest heaving. "You'll all die for this," he spat. "The army will burn your village to the ground." Black Elk's eyes were cold, but his voice was calm. "We have proof of your lies, soldier. The white man's words our own people condemn you." He held up Jacob's journal, its pages open to the damning entries. "This woman risked her life to bring us truth. You will answer for your crimes." Clara's legs buckled, and she sank to her knees, exhaustion and pain overtaking her. Tkasik caught her, his hands gentle despite his own wounds. "You did it," he said softly. "You saved us." "Not yet," Clara murmured, her eyes fixed on Holt. She knew the fight was far from over. The journal might sway the Lakota, but the settlers and the army were another matter. She needed to return to Willow Creek, to confront the townsfolk with the truth and stop Holt's campaign before it destroyed everything. The Lakota bound Holt and the surviving scout, their hands tied with rawhide. Black Elk approached Clara, his gaze steady. "You are not like the others," he said. "You carry a warrior's heart. Come to our village. We will tend your wounds and decide what comes next." Clara nodded, too weary to argue. With Tassik's help, she climbed onto a horse, the journal tucked safely in her bag. The ride to the Lakota village was a blur, the pain in her arm pulsing with every step. The village was a cluster of tipis nestled against a river, surrounded by rolling hills. Women and children watched as they arrived, their faces a mix of fear and hope. Clara felt the weight of their stares, a stranger in a world she had once feared. The Lakota tended her wounds with skill, cleaning and bandaging her arm while Tkasik rested nearby. Black Elk gathered the village elders, reading aloud from Jacob's journal as Clara listened, her heart heavy with the memory of her husband's words. The elders nodded gravely, their faces etched with resolve. They agreed to send a delegation to Willow Creek, to present the journal to the settlers and demand a meeting with the Army's higher command. But Clara knew the settlers would not be easily swayed, fair and prejudice ran deep, and Holt's lies had taken root. As night fell, Clara sat by a fire, Tkasik beside her. The village was alive with quiet activity, women preparing food, children whispering about the white woman who had saved their warrior. Clara felt a strange peace, despite the uncertainty ahead. She had crossed a line she could not uncross, choosing truth over vengeance. And it had brought her here, to a place she never imagined. "We must go to your people," Tkasik said, his voice low. "The journal is not enough. They need to hear you, to see you." Clara nodded, her throat tight. "I know, but they'll hate me for this. I've burned every bridge I had." "Not all," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "You have us now." The words settled over her, a fragile hope in a world of conflict. She thought of Mary and Tommy, of Caleb's reluctant courage, of the settlers who might yet listen. The next morning, she and Tkasik set out with a small group of Lakota warriors, led by Black Elk. Holt and the scout were brought along, bound and under guard, their presence a grim reminder of the stakes. The journey back to Willow Creek was tense, the plains stretching endlessly under a gray sky. Clara's arm ached, but her resolve was unbreakable. She rehearsed what she would say, how she would face the townsfolk who had branded her a traitor. Jacob's journal was her weapon, its pages a testament to the truth she had fought for. They reached Willow Creek at dusk, the town quiet but tense, the air thick with the scent of smoke and fear. Word of their arrival spread quickly, and a crowd gathered in the town squareman with rifles. Women clutching their children, faces hardened by years of hardship. Mary and Tommy ran to Clara, their relief palpable, while Caleb stood nearby, his expression guarded but supportive. Clara stepped forward, the journal raised high. "Listen to me," she called, her voice carrying over the murmurs. "You've been lied to. The Lakota didn't kill those people at Red Canyon. The army did take their land. My husband wrote it all down, and I have proof. The crowd stirred, some shouting in disbelief, others whispering in doubt. Holt, bound and kneeling, laughed bitterly. "You're fools if you believe her. She's a traitor, siding with savages." Black Elk stepped forward, his presence silencing the crowd. He held up the journal, reading aloud Jacob's account of Holt's treacherous staged attacks. The murdered hunting party, the lies that fueled a war. Clara watched the settlers' faces, seeing flickers of doubt, of anger, of shame. Mary spoke up, her voice trembling but clear. "Clara's one of us. She's risked everything for this. Read the journal yourselves." Old man Jenkins took the book, his hands shaking as he skimmed the pages. Others gathered around, their murmurs growing as the truth sank in. Caleb, his voice gruff, addressed the crowd. "We've been played. Holt's no hero, he's a butcher." The tide began to turn, but not without resistance. A few men, loyal to Holt's lies, raised their rifles, shouting for blood. Clara's heart sank. She had hope for peace, but the frontier was a place of violence, and old hatreds died hard. The Lakota warriors tensed, their hands on their weapons, and for a moment, it seemed the square would erupt in bloodshed. Then Tommy stepped forward, his small voice cutting through the tension. "Stop it," he cried. "Clara's trying to help. Why do we keep fighting?" His words hung in the air, a child's plea that shamed the adults into silence. Clara seized the moment, her voice steady despite the pain in her arm. "We don't have to be enemies. The Lakota want to live, just like us. We can stop this war, right here, right now." The crowd wavered, and Jenkins raised a hand. "She's right. I've read the journal. Holt's lied to us all. We send him to Fort Riley. Let the army deal with him." A murmur of agreement spread, and the men who had raised their rifles lowered them, their faces conflicted but resigned. Holt's protests grew frantic, but the settlers turned away, their trust in him broken. Black Elk nodded to Clara, a silent acknowledgement of her courage. The final act came swiftly. Holt and the scout were loaded onto a wagon, bound for Fort Riley to face justice. The settlers agreed to a truce with the Lakota, a fragile promise to share the land and avoid further bloodshed. Clara, exhausted and battered, felt a weight lift from her heart. She had lost her ranch, her home, but she had gained something greater, a purpose, a chance to heal the wounds of the past. In the weeks that followed, Clara and Tkasik worked to build a trading post on the ruins of her ranch. It was a modest structure, a place where settlers and Lakota could exchange goods for tools, food for blankets without fear. Mary and Tommy helped, their presence a reminder of the family Clara had found. Black Elk visited often, his wisdom guiding the fragile peace. Clara stood one evening, watching the sunset over the plains, Tkasik beside her. "We did it," she said, her voice soft. "We stopped the war. For now," he replied, his eyes on the horizon. "But peace is hard-won. We must keep fighting for it." Clara nodded, her heart full. She had lost everything, her home, her past, but she had found a new path, one of courage and compassion. The frontier was still a place of hardship, but it was also a place of hope, where two peoples could learn to live as neighbors.